Hello, free speech lovers. This is your host, Nico Perino. Are you a regular listener to this podcast? Do you think the ideas we discuss, like free speech, academic freedom, and a free press, are important? If so, please consider giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes. It's the easiest thing you can do to help get us more listeners on the show. Just go to iTunes on your computer, or open up your podcast app on your iPhone, search for So To Speak, and give us your rating. It's as simple as that. And have you unintentionally missed a few of the past episodes? Like maybe our gonzo-style trip to Flying Dog Brewery, or our interview with author Jonathan Rauch? If so, you sound like someone who should sign up for our email list. You can find that email list at thefire.org/so-to-speak-podcast. We'll send you an email every other Thursday when a new podcast is posted, and you'll never miss an episode, or at least hopefully. So now, on to the show.
Freedom of speech.
Fundamental rights.
Freedom of conscience.
Academic freedom.
Freedom of press.
And the right to listen.
You're listening to So To Speak, the free speech podcast, brought to you by FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education.
Welcome back to So To Speak, where we take a look at the world of free expression through personal stories and candid conversations. If you care about issues relating to free expression, you should care about Turkey. According to recent reports, more than 123,000 Turks have been fired from their jobs, more than 42,000 people have been arrested, including more than 150 journalists, around 150 news outlets have been shut down, and 6,900 academics have lost their jobs. And all of this has happened since July 2016, when there was an attempted coup in Turkey of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's government. This led to a brutal crackdown on anyone within Turkish society perceived to be a threat to the Erdogan government. Critical journalists, academics demanding protection of human rights and civil rights, judges and prosecutors who won't bend the law to Erdogan's will. The list continues, and you get the picture. And to justify this crackdown, surprise, surprise, the government has used emergency decrees and overbroad and vague speech codes. Sound familiar? I spend my days fighting speech codes with the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, and standing up for students and professors who find themselves punished for violating these illiberal and, at public colleges, unconstitutional policies. And while the violations of student and faculty rights on American campuses seriously threaten the fabric of our liberal society, what's been happening in Turkey recently makes what's been happening in the United States look almost petty. While, for example, we often see a professor's job in danger because they dissent from a campus orthodoxy, never do we see that same professor jailed for their dissent, under threat of a permanent blacklist from ever finding a job ever again. Turkey is a unique country, as I'm sure many of you know, and it's packed with cultural heritage. It's nestled between Europe and the Middle East. It borders Bulgaria and Greece to the west, and it shares borders with countries like Iraq, Iran, and Syria to the east. For example, war-torn Aleppo in Syria is just over 30 miles from the Turkish border. Needless to say, it's not an easy part of the world to be in right now. Unlike many other countries in the Middle East, Turkey claims to be a secular state, although an estimated 90% of its citizens are Muslim. In many ways, because of its secular government, we in the West are ignorant of what's been happening in Turkey lately, including myself. Superficially, we see Turkey as a quote-unquote Western Middle East country that has a reverence for democracy, individual rights, and a desire to enter the European Union. It's been a United States ally for many years in the war on terror. We have bases there. But those preconceptions are years old at this point. Even before the 2016 coup attempt, Turkey has been in a downward spiral toward authoritarianism, and it uses the rhetoric of democracy to shroud serious attacks on individual rights. So to help shed light on what's been going on in Turkey, our guest today is Mahir Zeynalov. Mahir is a journalist with the Huffington Post and Arabiya. He started his career with the Los Angeles Times, and he later joined Today's Zaman and worked there until the Turkish government shut down the newspaper in 2016. What's been happening in Turkey is a personal affair for Mahir. He was deported from the country in 2014 for critical coverage of the Erdogan government. He faces jail time if he ever returns. And his Twitter accounts have been banned in the country. It was recommended I speak to Mahir by a colleague of mine, Sarah McLaughlin, who herself has been critical of Turkish crackdowns on civil liberties and who told me that Mahir's Twitter account is a must-follow for anyone seeking news on what's been going on in Turkey. And she was right. During the show, I speak with Mahir about the mind-boggling number of people being purged from Turkish civil society right now, what the international community can do to help, why the United States has been relatively silent about the growing Turkish tyranny. We also talk about the love affair, or the growing love affair, between Erdogan and Russian President Vladimir Putin, and the bizarre support that Erdogan has within the Turkish population. This podcast was recorded on Tuesday, January 10th, and the arrests and firings, I should say, have only intensified since then. Just this week, the Turkish parliament approved a new draft constitution that, to me, seems to give Erdogan tremendous power and has the potential to transform the country into more or less an executive branch dictatorship. The new constitution will likely be voted on in an April referendum, and I will certainly update our listeners about the outcome of that referendum on this show. Mahir is in Washington, D.C. I live in New York City. So we spoke on the phone. If the audio quality sounds like that of a phone conversation, it's because it was a phone conversation. But you should be able to hear everything we're saying clearly. If you really enjoy this conversation and want to hear more about Turkey, we'll be releasing a first ever, so to speak, extra tomorrow. It'll be a conversation with Middle East Studies Association President Beth Barron, whose organization has been sounding the alarm bells and helping scholars in Turkey for quite some time now. Originally, I intended to combine my conversations with Mahir and Professor Barron into one show, but after our editor Aaron Reese and I thought through it some more, we decided it best to give each of these fantastic guests their own space. So again, you'll hear Beth Barron tomorrow, although she'll be mentioned during this podcast. Anyway, I'll get out of the way. Now on to our conversation with Mahir Zeynalov. Mahir, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
It was recommended that I speak with you by my colleague Sarah because you seem to be one of the most active people on Twitter, sounding the alarm bell about what's happening right now with essentially civil society in Turkey. Can you kind of give us a 30,000-foot overview of what's happening in Turkey right now?
We know that at least 169 media outlets were shuttered in the past 6 months, especially after the emergency law was declared on July 20th, just 5 days after the military coup attempt in Turkey. And the media crackdown has significantly escalated since that time. We know that at least 1 or 2 journalists are being jailed almost every day on average since that day in July last summer.
Yeah, and I read that like the New York Times isn't even running bylines by their journalists in Turkey for fear of any sort of reprimand that the Turkish government might have of them.
Oh, that's right. I mean, it's not only Turkish journalists who feel the threat, but also foreign journalists too. I was the first foreign journalist in Turkish history who was deported from Turkey over a couple of offensive tweets. And since then, in 2014, 12 foreign journalists were deported. The last one was Dion from the Wall Street Journal, who left Turkey after a brief detention for 3 days. And since then, the New York Times is running bylines, anonymous bylines, and so they really fear that their journalists could be under threat. It could be, strangers, interpreters on the ground, local ones, but also their foreign journalists too. We know that more than a dozen foreign journalists were detained, some of them over 40 days, such as Frederike Gernege, a Dutch freelance journalist who was covering the war in the southeastern Turkey. So the Turkish government is sending a signal to foreign reporters that The southeastern Turkey, which is virtually a war zone, where the PKK and the Turkish army are fighting, is off limits to foreign reporters. And we know that two British journalists from the Vice News and the Iraqi journalist also from the Vice News were detained, I think, like nearly a month, and they were deported after that. So it's not only Turkish journalists, but also foreign reporters are also feeling the heat of the media crackdown in Turkey.
And why? What is the argument that the government is making for the crackdown on media, for the shuttering of news outlets, for the jailing and detention of journalists?
Well, in the past, before the military coup attempt, they were telling that you can criticize the government, but you cannot insult. So they had been exploiting a law in Turkish penal code that was about the insulting the president, insulting other public officials, and also they're also exploiting a very vague and broad anti-terrorism law and trying to jailing dissent. So if you are, for example, criticizing the Turkish government or Turkish army's handling of the Kurdish issue, how they, for example, bombing, Kurdish cities, then you are promoting the PKK propaganda. If you are, for example, criticizing the government and how the courts are using laws to jail, for example, Gülenists and other, political dissidents, then you are considered as someone who is promoting or spreading the Gülenist propaganda, which is listed as a terrorist organization in Turkey. So they are using a variety of laws. They're actually exploiting them to jail dissidents. Since the military coup attempt, they are saying that the Turkish state and Turkish government is under a grave threat, and they are just jailing, anyone who is just posting on Twitter and Facebook. On December 24th, the Turkish Interior Ministry said in a statement that 3,700, 10 people were detained in the past 6 months for their posts on Twitter and Facebook. Even foreigners are included in that list, including a Canadian tourist who said on Facebook that Erdogan, the Turkish president, is jailing journalists, and she was sent to prison for saying that, and she was charged for insulting the president. I myself is facing 6 years in prison, pressed by Erdogan for insulting him, but also inciting hatred and animosity among public.
Are you a Turkish citizen? Because you're in D.C. right now, right?
Yeah, I'm in Washington D.C. at the moment. I'm Turkish by marriage, so I'm just half foreigner, half Turkish.
Gotcha. So, you talk about the coup in July, precipitating the new crackdown that's happening. But this isn't really new for Erdogan, right? I mean, a lot of the stuff that he's doing to journalists, that he's doing to people that support the Kurds, for example, in the southeast of Turkey, has been happening since earlier this year, even last year. And later in this segment, I'll talk with Beth Barron, who is the president of the Middle East Studies Association. She came to the defense of 1,200 Turkish scholars who signed a petition in support of human rights, particularly with their relation to the Kurds. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, it's absolutely correct that this crackdown is not new. We witnessed similar types of crackdown in the past decades, not only under Erdogan, but also before that. But the problem today is that crackdown has significantly escalated, especially after the military coup attempt. Just look at the numbers. 100,000 people have been detained in the past 5 months, and half of them were arrested pending trial. And the torture has shown its ugly face again. There are at least 25 people who were found dead in prisons. And we know that in early 1990s and in the past, perhaps like 6 or 7 years ago, there were some Kurdish lawmakers and Kurdish politicians were put in jail, and we thought that we actually put a pause on that. But what happened just a couple of months ago, they put like 13 Kurdish lawmakers, including a leader, a presidential rival, Selahattin Demirtas, in prison. This is the man who challenged President Erdogan, during the presidential election. This is the man who told him that we will not make an executive president, and now he's in prison. what kind of country is jailing presidential rivals? So it's absolutely right that this crackdown is not new, but it's significantly escalated since the military coup attempt, and especially in the past 5 years, when there was a constitutional amendment in 2010, and when Erdogan significantly consolidated power. I think it just gave him a free way to further crack down on dissidents. He's exploiting the failed military coup attempt to do that. And that 1,200 academics who signed the peace declaration, basically calling on the Turkish state and the PKK to cease hostilities and resume peace talks, 200 of them were dismissed, and almost all of them were are under investigation at the moment. And I think like nearly 50 of them were just dismissed last Friday. And they are not the only ones who are facing the threat in Turkey. We have over 4,400 academics who were fired from their jobs, and some of them are, very celebrated professors, very great scholars, and they were just fired from their universities. There are, I think, like more than 20 of them are presidents of universities. 15 Turkish universities were shut down in the aftermath of the coup attempt, and more than 60,000 Turkish students were just, put in limbo.
Yeah, and there was a number. Almost every dean, it seems like, in the country was dismissed from their job.
Well, I'm not sure about how many deans. If all of the deans were dismissed, but I know that 1,600 deans were asked to resign after the military coup.
Yeah, that's what I'm referencing.
Right. I mean, I'm not sure if they are like all of the deans, but I know that there are nearly 2,000 academics who are in prison at the moment, and I know that the 4,400 academics were fired in the past 5 months, and there are hundreds of academics who just, fled the country. Those danger boats that used to carry Syrian refugees to Greece are now filled with Turkish professors. And I think it's safe to say that we have the most educated prison population in the world.
It's pretty incredible. I mean, when you're talking about those 1,200 signatories to the peace petition, Erdogan went on public television or public radio or whatever it was and called them enemies of the state. He said they were inciting people to hatred. He called upon the institutions, everyone who benefits from the state, to punish them without further delay. And I mean, that's something that's almost inconceivable here in the United States.
That's right. And we have to understand fault lines in the society in Turkey. And before every election, and we had I think 4 in the past 2 or 3 years, before every election, Erdogan is whipping up the nationalist sentiment in the country because he really needs those nationalist votes as he's preparing for a constitutional referendum, I think in 3 months, which will grant him broad executive powers as a president. So he's really, inviting those actors in the southeastern Turkey for a civil war, basically, and which is ongoing in Turkey by shutting down Kurdish media outlets, by arresting Kurdish politicians. And you are right. I mean, this is something inconceivable in the West. But, considering the circumstances in Turkey, whenever you are railing against those academics who signed a peace letter, which is considered as a treason by nationalist circles, it's actually very helpful for Erdogan. So he's a calculating pragmatist. He's a very smart politician, and he's exploiting those fault lines in the society to make sure that he wins the next election.
But do you really have free and fair elections in Turkey? I mean, do the votes really matter anymore?
Well, we do have free elections, maybe not fair, because the election day is free. Everyone is free to go and cast their ballots freely without any interference, obviously, which is very similar to Western democracies. But I don't think this is fair, because just imagine the last election was on November 1st, 2015. And just 3 days before the elections, 4 media outlets, 2 television channels, 2 newspapers were stormed by the riot police, and they were shut down. and there are dozens of scores of journalists are in jail. There are many media outlets were shut down, and just imagine what kind of signal this sends to other journalists.
And you're saying he jails his political opponents as well.
Yes, exactly. It's not only dissidents, it's not only activists, it's not only journalists or academics, but also political rivals too. In 2014, Selahattin Demirtas, the Kurdish party HDP leader, challenged him in the elections, and he got 10% of the votes, and now he's in jail. And ironically, Tuesday was the international, the Working Journalists Day. But in the past 5 years, 10,000 Turkish journalists were fired from their jobs. There are an army of Turkish journalists without jobs. And just to add insult to injury, Erdogan released a statement on Tuesday saying that, celebrating the Working Journalists Day for Turkish journalists, some of whom read that statement in prison, I presume.
That's pretty incredible. And also, I mentioned when you first came on the show, the deterioration of civil society in Turkey from the top. I saw a tweet that you had from over the weekend where you talked about how the Erdogan government is going ahead and shutting down NGOs, nonprofit organizations that support things like a wide range of things that seemingly have no connection to the Gulen movement or to the Kurdish peace process, things like the Oncology Foundation, the Health for Everyone Association. So it seems like, what is Erdogan looking for here?
I think Erdogan is not only cracking down on dissidents or people whom he doesn't like. It's not only that; he's also transforming the entire country, from its education to the military. And by shutting down all these associations, foundations, only in the past 2 weeks, by the decree that Erdogan signed, in addition to another decree issued by the Interior Ministry, nearly 200 similar associations, as you mentioned, were shut down. And since the military coup attempt, the numbers are terrifying. There are like more than 2,000 foundations and associations were shut down, and some of them are, of course, related to the Kurdish. I'm not talking about the ones that were shut down last week, but the others. Some of them were associated with the Gulen movement. Some of them, are just foundations that just want, as family planning or abortion kind of, foundations. Some of them are promoting education. So when you look at the scale of the crackdown on the civil society, it's worrying. He is transforming the country in a way that will be in line of his wishes.
Yeah, and it seems like what he's doing. I'm not a Turkish citizen. I can't even really. When you talk about these numbers, Mahir, they're just so incomprehensible to me. It's just unbelievable that something like this could happen in a country that a couple of years ago seemed to be on the fast track to entering the European Union. What is the sense? You said you have Turkish relatives. Like, what is the sense on the ground there, and who are the people that are fighting back in Turkey? Can they fight back, and in what way?
Right. Coming to your first point, you're absolutely right. The numbers are staggering, and this is something that's the unseen in Turkish history. And the Wall Street Journal, had an editorial a couple of months ago, said that the Turkey purge, the crackdown in Turkey, is unparalleled. Something the world has seen in the past decades. It's something unprecedented in modern history. And when you compare these numbers to the size of Turkey and its population, and you can see how it damages the Turkish bureaucracy, Turkish institutions, its civil society and media. The Gulen movement is not really good at fighting back in terms of by organizing street protests, and there's no life for them. This is only just one part of the opposition in Turkey. The others, I think, one of the most successful ones is Kurds, and they are successful because they are used to this kind of crackdown in the past, 4 or 5 decades, and the PKK rallied many youth, armed them, and they fought back against the Turkish state. They are branded as terrorists by the United States, by Turkey, by the European Union. But there are many political parties emerged in the past 2 decades who fought back. So their media and their activists are really very active in Turkey who are fighting back. But when you look at the opposition parties, we have 3 opposition parties in the parliament. One of them is the Kurdish party, and most of them are in jail at the moment, including 2 of their co-chairs. The other is the Nationalist Party, which is basically and effectively just co-opted by the government. They are voting to make Turkey a presidential system. They're just, in line with Erdogan. So I don't really call them as an opposition. And we have another party, the CHP, which is a secular opposition party, and I think they are the most powerful ones. But still, there's a limit to what they can do. In the past, the CHP was somehow, aligned with the military, and the military was so powerful, and they were playing a bigger role in politics, in civil society, in judiciary. And now, because the military is so weak now, that's why the opposition party, the CHP, aligned with it, is weaker today. So there's a limit to what they can do, and actually they can do nothing. And Erdogan is just one by one exploiting the fault lines in the society, eliminating his enemies one by one, and the opposition parties and activists on the ground can do nothing about it. There's a climate of fear in Turkey. It's so prevalent that the people are really afraid of talking. I have lots of friends who just shut down their Twitter and Facebook accounts because there are many people who are jailed for their Twitter or Facebook posts. So they don't really want to be ones who are just, sent to prison for what they write. I even don't, send them, direct messages on Twitter or Facebook and ask them how they are, because I worry that, if somehow they are being investigated, that could be presented as evidence in court. So I even don't send messages for their safety. So you can imagine what others are thinking. And, I'm a journalist. I feel responsibility that, I need to fight back. I need to be the voice of those people who are oppressed there. And just imagine, me as a journalist who needs to be brave, I'm trying my best, and there's a limit to what I can do. And just imagine what others, teachers, doctors, all these people who were purged and dismissed in the past few months, and just imagine what they can do. There's a limit, and those who fight back are very few, if any, which means that we'll have a bleak future for Turkey, unfortunately.
Yeah, and just the way you describe it to me, it seems like there's almost nothing that can be done within Turkey at this point, short of an armed revolution of some sort. Is it really, the pressure really need to come from the international community, because Erdogan's done such a good job of consolidating power and nipping away at any opposition within the country itself?
Well, we had international pressure, let's say, a decade ago, and of course, Erdogan was not all powerful back then. But when those autocrats, remain in power for so long, for a decade or 2 or 3, they really learn how to defy the international pressure. And the other international actors, like the European Union or the United States, they learn to adapt to those, authoritarian leaders. Saddam Hussein or Bashar al-Assad, these are the folks, or Muammar Gaddafi, these are the folks who are really good at defying international pressure. This is what they are best at. And they are very smart politicians, and they, through different diplomatic maneuvering, they're just, pitting one country against another. Look at Turkey, how Erdogan is, jumping on the Russian and Chinese bandwagon and sending signals to the United States. And just when you look at the past 2 or 3 weeks of publications in the Turkish media, how they are targeting the United States, not only the media, but also Turkish Prime Minister, the President, other ministers are assailing against the United States and bashing them almost daily. And I just read a news report today that the United States is going to help Turkey in their military campaign in northern Syria. So when I look at these facts, I see that the United States is now considering to adapt to Erdogan and look at him as someone who is the leader of Turks and who is there to stay. There's a limit to what the United States can do. George W. Bush was the president who invaded countries to bring democracy. And, Barack Obama just turned a blind eye as many, leaders, including Erdogan, slid into autocracy. And we now have, Donald Trump, whose, victory was celebrated by dictators like Putin, like, Erdogan. So when I look at the development in the world, and there's the upsurge of populist leaders all across the world, not only in Turkey but also in Europe, things with the Brexit and the United States and the Philippines and Russia. I think that this is the new reality. This is the new normal, and the membership with the European Union is on life support, if not dead. There's almost nothing the European Union can do. There's a migrant deal that the European Union is very much interested in preserving, because the influx of the Syrian refugees through Turkey into Europe is also fueling xenophobic, racist sentiments in Europe and giving rise to those populist leaders. And with crucial elections in Europe next year, particularly in France, I think they are really aware of the fact that they have to keep Turkey happy so that it does not allow those Syrian refugees to cross from Turkey to Europe. And Turkey needs the European Union money in the face of the economic crisis they are facing there. So I think it's a win-win situation for both sides, and the international community can do nothing about that. The Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, other rights advocacy groups, they are just crying fool. Turkey is not really paying attention to them, and the Turkish society is actually reviewing them as tools of the Western imperialism and oppression. So at home, the situation is bleak. When you look at internationally, there's a limit to what they can do.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you say things like that, and you say there's a rise of nationalism and nationalist leaders like Erdogan, I mean, does Erdogan have a lot of support in Turkey?
Yes, I think this is one of the few things that that in the Western world people don't really see. They believe that Erdogan is a leader of a minority group who is just oppressing Turks, like in Syria, the Bashar Assad is a leader of a minority group. I think this is a misconception. One of the latest surveys show that 53% of Turkish people actually supporting Erdogan. I mean, he's wildly popular in Turkey. So in that sense, he kind of effectively established a tyranny of majority. It's not like a few people trying to establish a repressive regime over others. The number of the people who are happy the way Erdogan is handling the country is perhaps the biggest in Turkish history. It's very similar to Putin. Whenever I'm reading, news reports about, Vladimir Putin and Russia, and I say, hey, wait a second. I mean, this is very familiar to me. He's a nationalist leader. He's just whipping up those national sentiments in the country. He's just, he's a textbook definition of populism, claiming that, there are special interest groups, not in Turkey, but also internationally. There are dark, evil circles with global links, and they are targeting Turkey in the aftermath of every major terrorist attack or bombing attack or shooting. Every time the Turkish media, from the orders from the authorities, obviously, they're just, and also politicians too, are just saying that, Turkey is a target. They are attacking us instead of, officials resigning or taking responsibility or trying to fix the situation. And when you look at the security situation in Turkey, only in 2015 we have more than a dozen bombing attacks. And we fear that the Turkey will turn into another Syria or Iraq.
Yeah, and it seems like such a predicament to me, especially when you have a United States which is essentially impotent in holding Turkey to account. I know Secretary of State Kerry was there last year, I believe after the coup. United States uses Turkey as a base in many ways for its operations in the Middle East, right? So they don't want to push back against Erdogan too hard, lest they lose their one true ally, military ally in the region. Is that right?
Yes, it's right. I mean, Turkey had been a Turkish ally, but I'm not sure if they are strategic ally at the moment or not. I think they are more.
Yeah, well, with Russia, yeah.
And I mean, look, Erdogan met with Putin for 5 times in the past 6 years, and they just talking on the phone almost in every 2 weeks, and military cooperation between Turkey and Russia is increasing in northern Syria, and Russian warplanes are giving an air cover for Turkish military campaign in northern Syria. This is something the United States did not do, and now they are trying to rectify the situation by helping Turkey, trying to halt the Turkish-Russian military cooperation. But you are right. I mean, Turkey is just right on the border of Syria and Iraq, where the United States is fighting against ISIS there, and with incoming administration, which promised that it's the crux, the centerpiece of their foreign policy will be fighting and defeating ISIS. I think they will try to use every possibility there is, and Turkey is a very big one of them, to fight against ISIS. And the Incirlik air base in the southern Turkey is very crucial for U.S. operations in Iraq and Syria. It's otherwise very costly when they fly jets from the Gulf region, and Incirlik air base in southern Turkey is very close. I think it's very geopolitically, Turkey is located in a very important place, and the United States will not want to lose Turkey to Russia too. So it kind of seems like there's a rivalry going on between Russia and the United States, trying to make sure that Turkey stays in their orbit. And I think Russia is doing a better job now because Erdogan himself views the Western countries as a threat to his authority and to Turkey in a broader sense. Because Vladimir Putin does not lecture Turkey and Erdogan about its human rights record, about how Erdogan is handling the country or jailing dissidents. They are quite happy together. But when it comes to the United States, they have to release human rights report. They have to, speak up against the, jailing dissidents and crushing, civil society. And this is something that Erdogan cannot understand, because for him, politics is, if this is the deal, this is the deal. That's it. Why you have to, say things against my country while you are not saying it to, for example, Saudi Arabia? So Erdogan cannot understand that the United States needs to say these things. And the United States really, I think, it seems that the United States really wants Turkey to be a Saudi Arabia that, we don't care about your human rights record. Just be our friends, be our partners. But Turkey is not another Middle Eastern, democracy, because in the Middle East, whenever you are becoming authoritarian, you're also becoming pro-Western and pro-United States. I mean, look at Egypt or Jordan or Saudi Arabia or some other countries. Whenever they're more authoritarian, they're actually pro-West. In East Asia, it's different. Whenever they are more authoritarian, they are pro-China. Look at Myanmar. The more the democracy they become, they are becoming more pro-Western. But Turkey is really a country that's trying very hard to redefine itself as a Western country or Eastern country. So whenever you have, whenever a leader is curbing civil liberties and freedoms in Turkey, it's also drifting away from the Western institutions and going towards more to the east, to Russia and China. So Turkey is a country where the partnership with the United States is important, is crucial, because Turkey respects democracy and civil liberties. At least it did in the past.
Well, it still uses the rhetoric of democracy. I mean, you talk about how Erdogan celebrates journalists at the same time he's jailing them. I mean, Vladimir Putin does that same sort of thing over in Russia. And I think the fact that they'll use the rhetoric of democracy and the rhetoric of human rights while at the same time violating democracy and violating human rights allows their Western partners, or at least those of us in the West, us regular citizens who aren't as tied into what's happening on the ground, to take our eyes off the ball, in a sense. And that, in a sense, is even more dangerous than having a place like North Korea, where we all know what's happening and there's nothing that the North Korean government can say to convince us otherwise.
Right, exactly. I mean, but when you look at other authoritarian countries, like, let's say, the former Soviet, the former Soviet Union or, China or North Korea, I mean, they have their own distinct ideology. I mean, they reject democracy. They say that it's evil. In Turkey, political Islamists like Erdogan or, Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, democracy works for them. And what they understand from democracy is not a liberal democracy that we understand in the West. It's a democracy. It's an electoral democracy. The rule of people. In Turkey, we don't have the rule of law anymore. We have the rule of the people. Erdogan keeps saying that, the majority of people elected me. I'm the voice of the silent majority. These people want me to be prime minister or president. So now I'm doing whatever they ask me to do. What we have in Turkey is not, a justice system. We have a mob justice.
Well, do you think that, I mean, you said earlier, I think you cited a study or a poll that said that 53% of the country supports Erdogan. I mean, I was talking to one of my friends who's actually was a refugee from the Soviet Union and was talking about Vladimir Putin and said, yeah, Vladimir Putin, they say he has this 80% approval rating, but all that really means is there's 20% of the people who felt confident enough that they could say that they didn't support him. I mean, are we getting a little bit of that in Turkey too, that people are just afraid to support Erdogan's opposition? I mean, if I'm a regular citizen of Turkey and I see undoubtedly my neighbors getting thrown in jail for the most tenuous connections to an opposition party or an opposition movement, I don't know that I could be confident that I could go to the polls and vote for someone other than Erdogan.
Yeah, but you actually confuse the United States or some other Western countries with Turkey, which is the situation is very different. I mean, look,
yeah.
And my wife, felt all this brunt and were just kicked out of the country. I'm wanted for arrest in Turkey. I have lots of friends who are wanted for arrest, who are living in exile. I have, nearly 300 people, most of them, reporters in Turkish prisons at the moment. And I'm not the only one who has this situation. There are many of people I know who are Turks who have those relatives in jail. And some of their, immediate family members support Erdogan. And the reason is because they don't really care about their relatives. They don't really care about, how Erdogan treats people. The society is so polarized. There's so many fault lines that they really think that this is a life and death situation in Turkey. You can be, friends. If you're a Democrat, you can be friends with a Republican. If you're a Republican, you can be a friend with a Democrat. But when you look at the United States in the past, let's say 2 years, how polarized it is, how it's very difficult for those who are supporting Trump to come together with the never Trumpers. So in Turkey, just multiply this with 10 times, and you will get the picture. So that's why Erdogan is very powerful. It's because he exactly understands how Turkish society works. The fault lines, he's exploiting those fault lines. He's just striking alliances with other groups, eliminating one opposition force and then going after another one by one. In just 15 years, he just absolutely finished the Turkish society. For example, let's say the Turkish authorities raided an opposition newspaper, I think back in October, right? They did not just went to the newspaper and arrested everyone. They arrested 13 people, but those 13 people are liberal wing of the newspaper and lost and hated by the old guard establishment of the newspaper. So he effectively pitted one part of the newspaper against another and try to make sure that some of the readers of the newspaper do not rally behind those columnists and journalists in the newspaper. So he's a very smart politician. He exactly understands how these lines work both at home and also abroad. So that's the reason why so many people are supporting him. And one of the hallmarks, one of the signs of being an authoritarian leader is that the majority of people is supporting you. It's not because they approve how you handle the country, but there's the almost entire Turkish TV networks, newspapers are brainwashing the society 24/7, and there are many people who have no idea about these corruption allegations and how people are feeling the heat under the authoritarian government, and those who do are so polarized that they just support Erdogan because they say that, look, we had Gezi demonstrations 3 years ago. We had then corruption investigation, which they claim was a coup, and then we had the military coup attempt. And when you consider how Erdogan came to power, the background of it, since the 1990s, we had only one single government. And between 1990 and 2001, we had 10 different governments, coalition governments. We had two major economic financial crises in Turkish history. One of them was in 1994, and the other was 2001. And Erdogan came to power in 2002. And two pillars that kept Erdogan from falling apart was political stability and economic stability. And these are, reinforcing processes too. And Erdogan was very successful in preserving both political stability and economic stability, which was, which we didn't see before him. So Turkish people are rewarding that. Turkish people are saying that, okay, Erdogan is someone who can keep, Turkish society firmly in place. We don't have political turmoil. We don't have economic crisis. So we are happy.
Yeah, as they say about the old fascists like Mussolini, they might be fascists, but they make the trains run on time, for example. So
actually, there's a famous motto in Turkey. Whenever there were allegations of corruption, some of the Erdogan supporters said that, okay, fine, they are stealing, but at least they are working, which was kind of a motto, very embarrassing motto of Turkish government loyalists.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time here. I know it's really hard within Turkey to get this sort of information outside of Turkey. I saw that you tweeted a couple of days ago that police now have access to internet users' account information in case they commits any sort of like quote unquote crime on social media. How are you getting information? I mean, you don't need to tell me specific sources, of course, but like, how do Westerners get this information outside of Turkey? And like, where should we go to learn what's happening aside from your Twitter account, which is at Mahir Zeynalov, MahirZeynalov. Like, where do we go to get this information?
I think I'm not sure if I agree with you that it's hard to get information out of Turkey because Turkish leaders are so brazen that they don't really care about hiding information. What they try to hide is information that would damage them in the eyes of Turks. They only care about the internal consumption. And jailing journalists, it's not something that would tarnish the government's reputation at home, but abroad. But they don't care about that, or just sending tens of thousands of people to jail or purging them. That's something that the Turkish people would cheer because they would say that, oh, look, the Turkish government is cleaning the Turkish bureaucracy and Turkish state from traitors. But this is something that would tarnish the reputation of the government abroad, and so they don't care about that. So they just publish all this information online, and all these the numbers and the dismiss people, purge people. I mean, these are all just online by published by the official newspaper and the state-run news agencies. They are just all online, published by the Turkish media, pro-government media, because they are only targeting the internal consumption. For example, in Russia, when there's an opposition journalist, being jailed, of course they're trying to hide this so that they don't seem bad for the West. But that's not the case in Turkey. In the era of social media, of course you cannot hide anything. But unless the Turkish TV networks or the major newspapers pick them up, they don't shape the public opinion. And those who use the social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook are mostly those critics anyway. Most of the electorate of the Turkish government are watching TV networks because most of them are rural, non-college educated people, and so they don't really go online and read foreign news outlets. They only watch TVs which are just brainwashing them 24/7. So it's not really if the news is out there, it's not damaging the government.
So that's one of the things that I learned from this conversation. I hope our listeners take away. I mean, I came to this situation before I spoke with you just now from the perspective of a Westerner, from the perspective of someone who believes that if a government is doing this sort of thing, shutting down NGOs, jailing journalists, jailing academics, and creating states of emergency that give the executive branch huge swaths of police power, if I see that, I think, okay, this is something the government wants to cover up. But what I've learned from you is in Turkey, no, this has wide popular approval, what he's doing. And so it's not hard to learn about what he's doing because they'll tell you.
Exactly. I mean, look at the Philippines, right? I mean, Filipino leader, Duterte does not hide the fact that, he's killing those, drug dealers, and he does not hide the fact that he did it in the past because it's very popular in the country, and he doesn't care about how the world thinks about it. And he's very anti-Western. And whenever, he's asked about all these deaths and murders, extrajudicial killings, he's very proud of it. And this situation is very similar in Turkey too. The Turkish people are supporting this, and the Turkish government does not really care about the international opinion. And Erdogan just a couple of weeks ago said that they are calling me a dictator, referring to Western media outlets and editorials in the West, or in the Western newspapers. It's just this goes from my right ear and goes out from the left ear. That's a Turkish saying. So this is his mindset. He now knows that the international community can do nothing about that. So he's just mostly focused on the Turkish electorate because there's a very crucial referendum to win in just 3 months.
Yeah, and one of my questions for you was going to be, if Erdogan were to lose power, would Turkey be a safer place for journalists and professors and other regular citizens, or has the culture changed so drastically in Turkey that, they're sort of screwed even if he is gone because there's this populist sentiment that supports what he does? And I think your answer would be, well, Erdogan isn't the whole problem right now.
Right, exactly. I mean, we also have this, culture of, mob lynching or mob justice. I can hear the crowd, whatever Erdogan is, speaking, the crowd is chanting death, death, death. I mean, that's how they crucified Jesus. That's how they, killed Socrates. This is the mob justice. And, in Turkey, you can be easily jailed for offensive remarks. In Turkish culture, you cannot swear at people. It's considered as a dishonorable thing. And whenever, you write, very harsh criticism, I mean, let alone just, insults and swearing words, just when you write, harsh criticism against, Turkish politicians, you can find at least 20 articles in the Turkish Penal Code that would criminalize whatever you write. And Turkish people would say, hey, I mean, just if you criticize, but why are you insulting? So they're actually using those criticism to kind of like portray you as someone who is, insulting the president or public officials. So it's all about, it's really very linked to the Turkish culture where the leader is venerated, is revered, and where you cannot insult them. You have to respect them. And whenever you don't respect the Turkish president, people have a hard time understanding it. We have a respect to the office of presidency or the state or public institutions. And as a citizen or journalist or activist, I may not have, right? But in Turkey, you cannot say that I support the military coup attempt. There could be a possibility that someone supports it, right? And this is protected under the freedom of speech, freedom of expression. But if you say that I support the military coup attempt, for example, then it's criminal. Something that's, inconceivable in the Western countries. So this is also about culture, that the Turkish people needs to be informed and educated that, when you open the gates of criminalizing speech, this will actually turn back as a boomerang against you. And there's no way that you can stop it. There's no limit. When you open the gates of, xenophobia or racism, it does not stop somewhere. It will just target everyone. So we have to, as Turks, we have to understand this fact. But there are many people in Turkey who support these jailing journalists, not because they don't like them, just because, they don't have that, mindset, that mentality that you cannot, try or prosecute journalists because you can hardly serve justice in those trials.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's sort of a dispiriting conversation for me to have with you right now because it seems like a very bleak outlook. And the things you're talking about, the criminalizing of speech, these are things that in the work that my organization, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, does on college campuses, we see all the time. The use of speech codes that are well-intentioned or seem to go after things that no one would disagree with end up being wielded by people, those in power, who you want to use them to essentially crush dissent or go after their own, petty disagreements. And here in Turkey, you have Erdogan using, statutes that criminalize things like terrorist propaganda to go after people, like signatories to the peace petition, for example. So it's just very dispiriting, and following your Twitter account, while very informative, demonstrates to me that in the West, should be those of us who support free speech is one of our foremost concerns. And as you sign off here, because we're running out of time, where should those interested in learning more about Turkey go to get that information?
Well, there are several news outlets in English. I think one of them is Hürriyet Daily News, where they can get their news from. And they are, somewhat independent, although questionably. And there's, if they want to get the government version of events, they can go to Daily Sabah. When they Google them, you can just, access their websites. And there's another, opposition news outlet called TurkishMinute.com. If they go there, you can actually see the crackdown on the opposition and the latest, breaking news about Turkey. And there is another website that I think is very interesting. They keep track of the crackdown in Turkey by numbers. It's called TurkeyPurge.com. If you go there, you can actually see all these, numbers about, journalists, academics, foundations shut down, and the people purged, and all these the judicial proceedings there. So I think they are really very good reference website that you can go to. And there's also another the website they called theglobepost.com, which I'm editing. And it's a relatively new website. We're also publishing somewhat investigative, in-depth articles about Turkey, and I think it's also a very good place to go and check out about what's going on in Turkey. And these are only just few Turkish the news outlets that are publishing stories about Turkey in English for the Western audience.
Yeah, staggering stories. I mean, crazy and scary stories too. Well, I hope that you and your family stay safe. Of course, you're here in the United States, and we'll do what we can here in the free speech community to keep sounding the alarm bells about what's happening over there. But I want to thank you again for coming on the show, and keep up the great work and letting the world know about what's happening.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
That was Mahir Zeynalov. To learn more about Mahir and the Turkish crackdowns, I highly recommend following his Twitter account, which is @Mahir Zeynalov. That is @MahirZeynalov. Also, don't forget that tomorrow we'll be releasing our first ever So to Speak Extra, a conversation with Middle East Studies Association President Beth Barron. During that show, we'll learn more about what organizations in the West, like Mesa, are doing to fight the growing threat and existing threat to academic freedom posed by the Erdogan government. This podcast is hosted, recorded, and produced by me, Nico Perino, and edited by Aaron Reese. To learn more about So to Speak, you can follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/freespeechtalk, or like us on Facebook at facebook.com/so-to-speak-podcast. You can also email us feedback at sotospeak@thefire.org, or call in a question for a future show at 215-315-0100. Until next time, everyone, thank you for listening.